I came home early from the office that Tuesday, expecting silence and maybe some leftover coffee. Instead, I found my stepfather Kenneth hunched over my desk, his fingers flying across my keyboard, USB drives scattered like evidence of a crime scene. When he saw me frozen in the doorway, he didn't flinch. He smiled. "Family shares everything, Rachel," he said, as casually as if he'd borrowed a cup of sugar. "Your mother thought you wouldn't mind me using your office while you were out." That smile. That entitled, presumptuous smile told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't the first time he'd been here. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Rachel Bennett, and at 32, I'd built a career most people in cybersecurity would envy. I worked as a senior security analyst at TechCore Solutions in downtown Portland, protecting corporate networks from the exact kind of intrusion I was witnessing in my own home. The irony wasn't lost on me. My job was finding digital footprints, identifying unauthorized access, and building airtight cases against hackers and corporate spies. I spent 40 hours a week hunting people who thought they could steal data without leaving traces. I never imagined I'd need those skills against my own family. My townhouse in Riverside Heights wasn't just a home. It was my sanctuary, my workspace, my fortress of privacy in an increasingly connected world. The third bedroom had been converted into a professional-grade home office, complete with triple monitor setup, encrypted hard drives, and a network configuration that would make most IT departments jealous. I worked with sensitive information. Government contracts. Financial institutions. Healthcare systems. The kind of data that, in the wrong hands, could ruin lives or topple companies. Every file, every login, every piece of code on those machines was protected by layers of security I'd personally designed. Kenneth Dorsey had entered my life 2 years ago when he married my mother, Patricia. Mom had been alone for 5 years after Dad died, and I wanted her to be happy. Kenneth seemed harmless enough at first. A self-employed business consultant with a warm handshake and an endless supply of stories about deals he'd closed and connections he'd made. He talked about disruption and innovation and leveraging synergies, all the corporate buzzwords that sounded impressive but meant nothing. Mom was charmed. I was skeptical but supportive. She deserved companionship, and if Kenneth made her smile again, I could tolerate his presence at family dinners. But over time, small things began bothering me. The way he asked too many questions about my work. The casual inquiries about what companies I consulted for, what kind of security systems I managed, whether I worked with any startups looking for investors. I deflected politely, keeping my professional life separate from family gatherings. My work required discretion. Non-disclosure agreements weren't suggestions. They were legal obligations I took seriously. 3 weeks ago, Mom had an emergency appendectomy. Nothing life-threatening, but enough to require a few days of recovery and some help around the house. Kenneth played the devoted husband perfectly, taking time off from his consulting work to care for her. He'd asked if I had a spare key to my place, just in case Mom needed anything while she recuperated at their house in Meadowbrook. Something about picking up some books or supplies if necessary. I'd hesitated but eventually agreed, telling myself I was being paranoid. He was family now. Family could be trusted with a spare key. Standing in my office doorway that Tuesday afternoon, watching him frantically close windows on my screen, I realized how catastrophically wrong I'd been. Kenneth wasn't borrowing my office. He was mining it. And judging by the way his face had drained of color when he heard my car in the driveway, he'd been doing it for a while. The first warning sign had actually appeared 2 weeks earlier, though I hadn't recognized it at the time. I'd received an automated security alert from TechCore's internal monitoring system. Someone had attempted to access the company VPN using my credentials from an unrecognized device. The attempt had been blocked automatically, flagged as suspicious, and logged for review. When I'd checked with our IT department, they assured me it was likely a phishing attempt or credential stuffing attack. These things happened constantly in our industry. I changed my passwords, enabled additional two-factor authentication, and forgot about it. A few days later, another anomaly. My home network showed unusual bandwidth usage during hours I'd been at the office. Not massive amounts, but consistent data transfers that didn't match my typical usage patterns. I'd assumed it was automatic updates or cloud backups running longer than expected. I made a mental note to investigate but got pulled into an urgent client crisis that consumed my attention for the next 72 hours. Then came the weekend visit to Mom's house. She was recovering well, moving around with only minimal discomfort. Kenneth had been attentive and caring, bringing her tea and adjusting pillows with theatrical concern. But while Mom napped, I'd noticed his laptop open on the kitchen table. The screen showed a spreadsheet with names I recognized. Companies I'd worked with. Clients whose names should have been confidential. When I asked about it casually, Kenneth had closed the laptop quickly, explaining he was researching potential consulting clients and must have stumbled across some industry overlap with my work. His explanation was smooth and plausible. Too smooth. I'd driven home that evening with an uncomfortable feeling settling in my chest. Kenneth was asking too many questions. Showing too much interest in the specifics of my work. Appearing in places and conversations where he didn't quite belong. But I had no proof of anything wrong. Just instinct and a growing sense of unease that I couldn't quite articulate. My mother had always taught me to trust my gut while verifying with my head. She'd been an elementary school teacher for 30 years, and her approach to problems was methodical and evidence-based. Don't accuse without proof, she'd always said, but don't ignore the signals your instincts are sending. So I'd started paying closer attention. I began documenting the small oddities. The questions Kenneth asked. The times my network showed unusual activity. The security alerts that seemed too coincidental. That's when I decided to install additional monitoring on my home network. Nothing invasive or illegal, just enhanced logging of all devices connecting to my wireless router. I wanted to see exactly what was happening on my network when I wasn't home. The logs would show device MAC addresses, connection times, data transferred, and destinations. If something unusual was occurring, I'd have concrete evidence instead of vague suspicions. The logs told a disturbing story. For the past 11 days, an unknown device had been connecting to my home network every weekday between 9 in the morning and 3 in the afternoon. Right when I was typically at the office. The device was accessing my local network drives, attempting connections to my work laptop, and transferring significant amounts of data to external IP addresses I didn't recognize. Someone with physical access to my house was systematically copying files from my personal machines. I'd planned to confront this properly. Install hidden cameras. Gather irrefutable evidence. Build a complete picture before taking action. But fate had other plans. A client meeting had been canceled that Tuesday morning, and I'd decided to work from home instead of making the commute downtown. I'd arrived at my townhouse just after 11, expecting an empty house and a quiet afternoon of code review. Instead, I found Kenneth Dorsey sitting at my desk, surrounded by the digital remnants of corporate espionage, telling me with absolute confidence that family shares everything. The audacity of it took my breath away. He wasn't even trying to hide what he was doing. He believed he had every right to be there, accessing my machines, copying my files, stealing my professional life. I kept my voice steady, my expression neutral. Years of dealing with security breaches had taught me not to react emotionally when confronting a threat. Kenneth, step away from the computer. He stood slowly, holding up his hands in mock surrender. Rachel, you're overreacting. I just needed to look something up and your mother mentioned you had a great research setup here. I wasn't snooping through anything personal. His tone was patronizing, as if I were a child misunderstanding an innocent situation. I walked to my desk, noting the open applications. File Explorer showing directories I kept encrypted. Browser windows displaying client portals that required authentication. A USB drive plugged into my secondary port, its activity light blinking steadily as it copied data. Those are encrypted corporate files, I said quietly. How did you access them? Kenneth's smile faltered slightly. Your mother gave me some of your passwords. She thought it would be helpful in case of emergency. The lie was so blatant, so poorly constructed, that I almost laughed. My mother barely remembered her own passwords, let alone mine. She certainly didn't have access to my work encryption keys or corporate authentication credentials. Kenneth was improvising badly, throwing out excuses and hoping something would stick. "Get out of my house," I said, my voice harder now. "And leave the USB drive." Kenneth's expression shifted. The friendly stepfather persona cracked, revealing something colder underneath. "Don't be dramatic, Rachel. Your mother and I are struggling financially. You have access to valuable information. Information that could help our family. I'm just trying to level the playing field." There it was. The admission I needed, delivered with the arrogance of someone who believed family loyalty would prevent consequences. "Leave now," I repeated. "Or I call the police." Kenneth unplugged the USB drive, pocketing it despite my instruction. "You won't," he said confidently. "Because that would hurt your mother." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She doesn't need the stress of family drama right now. Be smart, Rachel. Pretend this didn't happen, and we'll forget about it. He walked past me toward the door, pausing in the hallway. Family shares everything. Remember that. The moment his car pulled away from my driveway, I locked every door, closed every blind, and sat down at my desk. My hands were shaking, but my mind was crystal clear. Kenneth had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He'd committed corporate espionage against someone who tracked digital crimes for a living. He'd stolen from someone with the skills, tools, and professional network to bury him. I opened my secure work laptop and composed an email to David Chen, my manager at TechCore Solutions. Subject line: Urgent security incident requires immediate attention. I detailed everything. The unauthorized access attempts. The suspicious network activity. Finding Kenneth in my office with active file transfers. I attached the network logs showing the pattern of intrusions. I included screenshots of the open applications on my desktop, clearly displaying confidential client data. Every word was factual, precise, and devastating. Then I called the one person in Riverside Heights who would understand exactly what needed to happen next. Dr. Helen Morrison had been my neighbor for 3 years. She was 75 years old, sharp as surgical steel, and had spent 30 years as a federal prosecutor specializing in white-collar crime before retiring to consulting work. We'd become friends over shared morning coffee and conversations about justice, evidence, and the importance of thorough documentation. Helen had prosecuted everyone from securities fraudsters to corrupt politicians. She'd once told me that the best cases were built slowly, methodically, with patience and precision. "Helen," I said when she answered, "I need your help. And I think you're going to enjoy this." Helen Morrison arrived at my door within 20 minutes, carrying a leather briefcase that looked older than I was and wearing an expression I'd seen in photos from her prosecutor days. Sharp. Focused. Ready for battle. She stepped inside, glanced around my home office with the practiced eye of someone who'd examined 1,000 crime scenes, and set her briefcase on my kitchen table. "Show me everything," she said without preamble. No pleasantries. No small talk. Just the immediate dive into evidence that told me I'd called exactly the right person. I walked her through the timeline, starting with the first suspicious VPN attempt 2 weeks ago and ending with Kenneth's brazen statement about family sharing everything. Helen took notes in a leather journal, her handwriting precise and economical. She asked pointed questions. What time did the network intrusions occur? Had I preserved the logs? Were the files Kenneth accessed protected by any specific legal agreements? Did my employment contract include provisions about securing work materials? Each question revealed another layer of potential charges, another angle of prosecution. "You work with government contractors," Helen said, tapping her pen against her notebook. "That changes the severity significantly. This isn't just corporate espionage. If he accessed anything related to federal contracts, we're looking at potential violations of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. That's federal jurisdiction. FBI territory. She looked up at me, and I saw something that might have been satisfaction cross her face. Kenneth just graduated from family nuisance to federal defendant. My phone buzzed with a call from David Chin. I put him on speaker so Helen could hear. "Rachel, I got your email," David said, his voice tight with concern. "I've already looped in our security team and legal department. They're treating this as a level 1 breach. We need you to preserve everything. Don't touch your home systems except to document. We're sending our forensics team to your location within the hour." He paused. "This is serious, Rachel. If unauthorized parties accessed client data through your credentials, we have mandatory reporting obligations. Government contracts. Financial institutions. Healthcare systems. Every single client whose data might have been compromised needs to be notified." Helen leaned toward the phone. "David, this is Helen Morrison. I'm Rachel's attorney." She wasn't, technically, but I didn't correct her. "Before your forensics team arrives, we need to discuss chain of custody procedures. Any evidence collected needs to be admissible in both civil and criminal proceedings. I assume your team understands federal evidence protocols?" David's relief was audible. "Dr. Morrison? The Dr. Helen Morrison who prosecuted the Cascade financial case?" Helen smiled slightly. "The same. And this case is going to make Cascade look like a parking violation." The TechCore forensics team arrived exactly 53 minutes later. 2 specialists in polo shirts bearing the company logo, carrying cases of equipment that looked like something from a spy movie. They introduced themselves as Kevin and Amanda, and their credentials were impressive. Both had backgrounds in law enforcement digital forensics before joining the private sector. They understood immediately what Helen meant about evidence protocols. Every drive they imaged, every log they copied, every file they examined was documented with timestamps, photographs, and detailed notes. Kevin set up his equipment and began analyzing my desktop computer while Amanda focused on network infrastructure. Within 30 minutes, Kevin let out a low whistle. "Rachel, you said he was here today around 11? I nodded. "He accessed 16 different client folders. Copied approximately 47 gigabytes of data to an external device. But here's the interesting part." He turned his laptop screen toward me. "He's been doing this for 12 days. Same pattern every time. Arrives between 9 and 9:30. Leaves between 2:30 and 3. Methodical. Systematic. He's been going through your files alphabetically." Amanda had pulled up network logs that painted an even more disturbing picture. "He's not just copying files for personal curiosity. Look at these outbound connections." She highlighted several IP addresses. "These are all commercial file sharing services. He's uploading your files to cloud storage and third-party servers. That suggests distribution. He's selling this information." Helen leaned in, studying the screen. "Can you trace where those files went after upload?" Amanda nodded. "With a warrant, yes. We can track the entire chain. Who downloaded them? When? From what locations? It's all logged." My phone rang again. This time it was a number I didn't recognize with a Washington, D.C. area code. Helen gestured for me to answer, and I put it on speaker. "Ms. Bennett, this is Special Agent Thomas Bradford with the FBI Cyber Crimes Division. Your employer filed a mandatory breach notification about 30 minutes ago. I understand you're the victim of a targeted intrusion involving federal contract data. I need to send a team to your location immediately." His voice was all business, but I caught an undertone of something else. Anticipation maybe. Like a hunter who'd just spotted fresh tracks. Helen took over the conversation with practiced ease. "Agent Bradford, Helen Morrison. I'm Ms. Bennett's legal counsel. We have a digital forensics team on site currently preserving evidence. The perpetrator is a family member with physical access to the residence who has been conducting systematic data theft over a 12-day period. We have complete logs, timestamps, and evidence of data distribution to third parties. We're prepared to provide full cooperation, but we need assurances about the scope and direction of your investigation. There was a brief pause. Dr. Morrison? The prosecutor? Bradford's tone shifted to something closer to respect. We'd be honored to work with you on this case. I can have a team at your location within 90 minutes. In the meantime, has the perpetrator been confronted or warned? I spoke up. He knows I discovered him, but he doesn't know about the forensic investigation. He took a USB drive with him when he left, which means he has evidence on his person. Bradford's response was immediate. Don't contact him. Don't warn him. If he realizes the scope of what's coming, he'll start destroying evidence. We need to move fast. After the call ended, Helen turned to me with an expression that was almost predatory. Rachel, I need you to tell me everything you know about Kenneth's background. His business. His finances. His connections. People who commit this kind of theft rarely do it in isolation. There's always a buyer. Always a conspiracy. If we're going to bring him down properly, we need to understand the entire network. I thought about Kenneth's constant talk of deals and investors and business opportunities that never quite materialized. He's running for the Riverside School Board. Election is in 3 weeks. His campaign platform is technology education and fiscal responsibility. Helen's eyes narrowed. A candidate running on technology expertise who's stealing tech secrets. The irony is almost poetic. What else? I pulled up my laptop and started searching. He runs a consulting business. Dorsey Strategic Solutions. Registered 2 years ago, right before he married my mother. Claims to advise startups on market strategy and investor relations. I clicked through his company website, which was long on buzzwords and short on actual client testimonials or case studies. His LinkedIn shows a lot of connections but very little concrete work history. Amanda had been running background searches while we talked. His business credit report is a disaster. 3 maxed out business credit cards. 2 outstanding judgments from unpaid vendors. A lien filed against his personal assets 6 months ago. He's drowning in debt. Kevin added his findings. His campaign finance reports show some interesting patterns. He's reported raising $80,000 for a school board race. That's unusually high for a local position. But when you look at the donors, most are small LLCs with minimal online presence. Shell companies probably. Helen made notes rapidly. So we have a financially desperate man running a failing business, mounting an expensive political campaign, and systematically stealing valuable data. The question is who's buying what he's stealing. She looked at Agent Bradford's contact information still displayed on my phone. The FBI will trace the data distribution. That's their expertise. But we need to understand Kenneth's local connections. Who he's meeting with. Who benefits from having corporate secrets and government contract information. I thought about the weekend visit to Mom's house, Kenneth's laptop open on the kitchen table showing that spreadsheet with company names. He had a list of companies. Some were my clients, but others weren't. I didn't recognize all of them. Helen nodded slowly. Competitors. He's building a shopping list. Identifying which companies would pay for which stolen information. This isn't opportunistic theft. It's calculated. Professional. She stood and began pacing, the way I imagined she had in courtrooms for 3 decades. We need more than just the data theft. We need the conspiracy. The buyers. The money trail. And we have exactly 3 weeks before his election to expose everything. My doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see 2 people in dark suits with FBI credentials already visible. Agent Bradford hadn't wasted time. Helen smoothed her jacket and picked up her briefcase. Let me do the talking initially. Federal agents are good at their jobs, but they need to understand this isn't just about prosecuting Kenneth. It's about destroying him so completely that he can never threaten anyone again. She smiled that sharp prosecutor smile. And I haven't destroyed anyone in almost 2 years. I'm looking forward to this. The FBI agents introduced themselves as Agent Bradford and Agent Lisa Chin. Bradford was exactly what I expected from his phone voice. Late 40s, gray at the temples, carrying himself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd spent 20 years taking down criminals. Chen was younger, maybe early 30s, with alert eyes that cataloged everything in my home within seconds of entering. They set up in my living room, pulling out laptops and recording equipment with practiced efficiency. Bradford got straight to business. Ms. Bennett, we've reviewed the breach notification from TechCore Solutions. The preliminary assessment is that this involves at least 7 federal contractors, 3 financial institutions, and 2 healthcare networks. If the stolen data includes anything classified or subject to HIPAA protections, we're looking at enhanced penalties under multiple federal statutes. He opened a folder. Tell me about Kenneth Dorsey. How did he gain access to your home? I explained the appendectomy, the spare key, the seemingly innocent request to help Mom during recovery. Chen took notes while Bradford listened with an expression that suggested he'd heard variations of this story 1,000 times. Classic exploitation of trust and vulnerability, Bradford said. Family members make ideal perpetrators because victims hesitate to report them. He was counting on your loyalty to your mother to keep you silent. He glanced at Helen. But he didn't count on you having Dr. Morrison as a neighbor. Helen leaned back in her chair. Agent Bradford, before we go further, I need to understand your priorities. Are you focused solely on the data theft, or are you interested in the broader conspiracy? Because based on what we've uncovered in the last 2 hours, Kenneth isn't working alone. He's distributing stolen data through commercial channels to multiple recipients. That suggests a network. An organization. Possibly other victims beyond Rachel. Bradford and Chen exchanged a look that told me they'd already considered this angle. We're very interested in the network, Chen said. The FBI has been tracking an increase in corporate espionage cases involving exactly this pattern. Someone with trusted access to valuable data, usually a family member or close friend of someone in the tech industry, systematically stealing and selling information. We believe there's an organized group recruiting and coordinating these thefts. If Kenneth is part of that network, he's our way inside. The implications hit me hard. Kenneth wasn't just a desperate man making bad choices. He was potentially part of an organized criminal operation. And I was just one victim among possibly many. How many others? I asked quietly. Bradford hesitated before answering. We have 14 active investigations with similar patterns across 5 states. All involve family members with access to tech workers' homes and computers. All involve systematic data theft over extended periods. And all involve subjects who are either running for local office or active in community leadership positions. Helen's expression sharpened. They're building cover stories. Political candidates and community leaders seem trustworthy. It provides plausible reasons for having connections and asking questions about local businesses. She turned to me. Rachel, when Kenneth asks you about your work, does he ever mention other people in tech? Friends or colleagues he's curious about? I thought back over months of family dinners and casual conversations. He asked about my coworkers several times. Wanted to know what projects they were working on, which companies they consulted for. I thought he was just making conversation, but now. I trailed off, realizing how many details I'd casually shared that could be used to identify other potential targets. He knows about at least 5 of my colleagues who work from home and have access to sensitive systems. Chen was already typing. We need names and contact information. If Kenneth is part of a larger operation, your colleagues might already be compromised or targeted. She looked up at me. How many people at TechCore have met Kenneth? Does he attend company events or family days? The question made my stomach drop. The summer picnic. He came as my mother's +1. Met at least a dozen of my coworkers and their families. He was charming. Friendly. Asked lots of questions about what everyone did. Bradford closed his eyes briefly, and I saw the weight of this revelation settle over him. He was recruiting. Identifying marks. Learning which employees had access to the most valuable data and which ones had vulnerable personal situations. He opened his laptop and pulled up a database. I need you to look at these photos. Tell me if you recognize anyone who was at that picnic or any company event Kenneth attended. The screen filled with surveillance photos and mugshots. Faces I didn't recognize mostly, but then one jumped out. A woman in her 50s with dark hair and professional attire. That's Jennifer Walsh. She's Kenneth's campaign manager. Bradford nodded grimly. Jennifer Walsh is a person of interest in 3 other corporate espionage cases. She moves to a new city every 2 to 3 years, always managing political campaigns for local candidates, always connected to data theft operations. If she's running Kenneth's campaign, then this is definitely part of the larger network. Helen stood abruptly, her energy shifting into high gear. Then we don't just take down Kenneth. We take down the entire operation. Starting with his campaign headquarters and working outward through every connection. She pointed at Bradford. You need warrants. Multiple simultaneous raids. Kenneth, Jennifer, anyone else in the network. Hit them all at once before they can warn each other. Bradford was already on his phone, talking rapidly to someone about judges and emergency warrant applications. Chen focused on me. Ms. Bennett, we need your help setting up a controlled scenario. Kenneth thinks he got away with this. He thinks you'll stay quiet to protect your mother. We need him to believe that for a few more days while we build the complete case and identify everyone in the network. Can you pretend everything is normal? The thought of facing Kenneth across a dinner table, smiling and making small talk while knowing he was a federal target, made my skin crawl. But I understood the necessity. What do you need me to do? The plan was simple in concept but required precision in execution. I would continue my normal routine as if nothing had happened. Attend the weekly family dinner at Mom's house. Act natural around Kenneth. Meanwhile, the FBI would be building their case, tracking every connection, following every piece of stolen data to its destination. Agent Chen called it a controlled detonation. Everything had to be in place before we lit the fuse, or the entire network would scatter like cockroaches when the lights came on. Wednesday evening arrived with the kind of autumn rain that Portland does best, steady and relentless. I drove to Mom's house in Meadowbrook with my stomach twisted in knots, rehearsing casual conversation topics in my head. The key was to seem slightly rattled but ultimately compliant, exactly what Kenneth would expect from someone who valued family harmony over confrontation. I parked in the driveway behind his silver sedan and noticed new campaign signs staked in the front yard. Kenneth Dorsey for School Board. A better tomorrow through technology. The slogan felt obscene now that I knew what his version of technology leadership actually meant. Mom answered the door with her usual warm hug, looking healthier than she had since the surgery. The color was back in her cheeks, and she moved without the careful slowness of someone in pain. Kenneth appeared from the kitchen, wearing an apron and carrying a wooden spoon like he was starring in some domestic fantasy. Rachel. Perfect timing. I'm trying a new recipe. Coco Vin. Your mother says it was your father's favorite. The casual invocation of my dead father's name while pretending to be the caring replacement made rage bloom hot in my chest, but I forced a smile. Dinner was surreal. Kenneth played the gracious host, pouring wine and asking about my week with seemingly genuine interest. Mom talked about her recovery and her excitement about getting back to her book club next week. I pushed food around my plate and contributed just enough to the conversation to avoid suspicion. All the while, I thought about the FBI surveillance team parked 3 houses down, recording every word through the wire I wore taped between my shoulder blades. Agent Chen had been very specific about placement. Keep it high enough that clothing movement won't create noise, but accessible enough for quick removal if Kenneth became suspicious or violent. Kenneth eventually steered the conversation where I knew he would. So, Rachel, I wanted to apologize for yesterday. I realize I overstepped by using your office without explicit permission. Your mother mentioned you had great research capabilities, and I got carried away with some campaign work. I should have asked first. His tone was contrite, his expression appropriately sheepish. He was good at this, I realized. Good at reading people and adjusting his performance to match what they needed to hear. Mom looked between us with concern. You were at Rachel's house? Kenneth, honey, I never said you could use her office. The crack in his story appeared immediately, and I watched him recalibrate in real time. You mentioned she had extensive files and resources. I must have misunderstood and taken too much initiative. I'm sorry, Patricia. And Rachel, I truly apologize. It won't happen again. He reached across the table and squeezed Mom's hand. The campaign has been stressful. I've been making poor decisions under pressure. Forgive me? Mom's expression softened instantly because that's what Kenneth counted on. Her compassion. Her willingness to believe the best in people. Her love for him clouding her judgment about his actions. I took a calculated risk, playing into exactly what Kenneth wanted to hear. It's fine. I overreacted. Work has been intense, and I'm protective of my space. Just please don't go in my house again without asking. Kenneth's relief was visible. Of course. Absolutely. Family boundaries matter. He raised his wine glass. To better communication and mutual respect. I clinked my glass against his, maintaining eye contact, letting him believe he'd successfully manipulated his way out of consequences. Mom beamed at both of us, thrilled that her family was harmonious again. After dinner, Kenneth excused himself to take a campaign call in his home office. The moment he left the room, Mom turned to me with worried eyes. Sweetheart, is everything really okay? You seem tense. I hated lying to her, but the FBI had been explicit. Tell no one. Not even the victim's family. Too much risk of accidental disclosure or emotional reactions that might alert the target. Just work stress, Mom. We had a security incident this week that's keeping everyone on edge. Nothing to do with Kenneth. Technically true, just missing the crucial detail that Kenneth was the security incident. Mom squeezed my hand. He really is trying, you know. The business hasn't been going well, and this campaign is his chance to establish credibility in the community. He's under enormous pressure. She lowered her voice even though Kenneth was upstairs behind a closed door. Between you and me, we've had money troubles. Some investments didn't work out. He's been stressed about finances. I think that's why he's been a bit scattered lately. The confession broke my heart because Mom didn't understand she was describing motive. She was explaining why her husband had turned to crime, thinking she was making excuses for ordinary human weakness. I drove home through the rain with my hands gripping the steering wheel hard enough to make my knuckles ache. The wire came off the moment I walked through my door, and I called Agent Chin immediately. He apologized and played the stressed candidate card. My mother bought it completely. She has no idea what he's really doing. Chen's voice was steady, professional. Good. That's exactly what we needed. He thinks he's safe. Meanwhile, we traced the data he stole from you to 3 separate buyers. One is a competitor of your client in the aerospace sector. Another is a foreign shell company with ties to industrial espionage networks. The third is still under investigation, but it appears to be connected to cryptocurrency fraud operations. The scope kept expanding. What had started as a violation of my personal space had become an international investigation involving multiple federal agencies. Helen called 30 minutes later with updates from her end. I've been pulling Kenneth's financial records through some well-placed contacts. He's not just broke, Rachel. He's buried. $200,000 in personal debt. Another $150,000 in business loans that are 90 days past due. His house, which is actually your mother's house, has a second mortgage he took out 6 months ago without her knowledge. He forged her signature on the loan documents. That revelation hit like a physical blow. He's stealing from her too. Not just me. Helen's voice hardened. Systematically. The forensic accountant I brought in found at least 12 forged checks over the past year, all from your mother's personal account. Small amounts, $500 to $2,000, spaced far enough apart that she probably didn't notice in her regular bank statement reviews. He's been bleeding her dry while playing the devoted husband. I thought about Mom's face at dinner, the way she defended him, made excuses for his behavior. She had no idea the man she loved was destroying her financially while using her as cover for federal crimes. Thursday brought new developments. Agent Bradford called with news that Jennifer Walsh, Kenneth's campaign manager, had been placed under surveillance. She met with 3 individuals yesterday at a coffee shop in downtown Portland. We've identified 2 of them as employees of tech companies with government contracts. The third is still unknown, but we're working on it. They exchanged USB drives. Old school, but effective for avoiding digital traces. We photographed the entire meeting. He paused. Rachel, we think they're accelerating their timeline. Something has them worried. Possibly your discovery of Kenneth on Tuesday. They might suspect law enforcement involvement. Helen had anticipated this possibility. Then we move faster than they do. When's the school board forum? I checked the campaign calendar Kenneth had left on Mom's refrigerator, marked with red circles around important dates. Next Tuesday evening. 7 o'clock at the Riverside Community Center. It's being live-streamed on YouTube and local cable access. All 5 candidates will be there for questions from the public. Helen's smile was audible over the phone. Perfect. Public venue. Live cameras. Hundreds of witnesses. That's where we end him. The next 5 days were a masterclass in covert investigation. FBI agents tracked Kenneth's every move while I maintained the illusion of normal life. I went to work, had lunch with colleagues, attended a Friday happy hour. All the while, federal prosecutors were building a case with more charges than I could count. Computer fraud. Wire fraud. Identity theft. Conspiracy to commit espionage. Forgery. Elder abuse. Each count carrying years of potential prison time. The forensic analysis of my computers revealed Kenneth had accessed proprietary information belonging to 17 different companies. The estimated value of stolen data exceeded $12 million. Agent Chen brought me updates daily, usually over coffee at a neutral location far from my house or office. We've identified 8 other victims in the network. Tech workers in Seattle, San Francisco, Austin, and Denver. All had family members with access to their homes who systematically stole data over periods ranging from 3 months to 2 years. Jennifer Walsh was connected to 6 of those cases. She's not just a campaign manager. She's a coordinator. She identifies targets, recruits the family members, provides technical guidance, and connects them with buyers. It's sophisticated, organized, and extremely profitable. Saturday brought an unexpected complication. Mom called, her voice excited and proud. Rachel, honey, Kenneth's campaign is really taking off. He got a major endorsement from the teachers' union yesterday, and donations have been pouring in. He might actually win this. I closed my eyes, knowing those donations were likely money laundered from his criminal enterprise, and the union endorsement had probably been obtained through connections Jennifer Walsh provided. Everything about Kenneth's campaign was built on stolen data, forged documents, and fraud. And in 4 days, it would all collapse in the most public way possible. Helen spent the weekend coordinating with federal prosecutors and preparing for what she called the simultaneous strike. Tuesday evening, while Kenneth is on stage at the forum, FBI agents will execute warrants at his home, his campaign headquarters, Jennifer Walsh's apartment, and the offices of 3 suspected buyers. We'll have 20 agents involved across multiple locations. The timing has to be perfect. We need him in public, on camera, unable to flee or destroy evidence when he realizes what's happening. She looked at me over her reading glasses. Are you ready for this? It's going to be brutal. Your mother will be there. She'll see her husband arrested in front of the entire community. That was the part one dreaded most. Not Kenneth's humiliation or arrest. Not even the satisfaction of watching him face consequences. But Mom's face when she realized the man she loved was a criminal who'd been using her as cover while destroying her financially and stealing from her daughter. "She'll be devastated," I said quietly. Helen nodded. "She will. But she'll also be free. Sometimes devastation is the price of liberation." She squeezed my shoulder gently. "And you'll be there to help her rebuild. That's what daughters do." Monday evening, Agent Bradford did a final walkthrough of the plan. Kenneth will arrive at the community center around 6:30. He'll have time to prepare, shake hands, work the crowd. The forum starts at 7 sharp. We'll let him get through his opening statement, establish himself in front of the cameras. Then at approximately 7:15, I'll receive a text that all warrant teams are in position. At 7:20, agents will enter the community center and approach the stage. He'll be arrested live in front of 400 people and however many are watching the stream. Bradford's expression was grim but satisfied. He wanted to be a public figure. He's about to become infamous. Tuesday morning felt surreal. I went through my normal routine, packing my laptop, making coffee, checking emails. But underneath the ordinary surface, adrenaline thrummed through my veins. Tonight, everything would change. Kenneth would go from political candidate to federal defendant. Jennifer Walsh and her network would be exposed. My stolen data would be recovered. And Mom would learn the truth about the man she'd married. I dressed carefully for the forum, choosing professional attire that would look appropriate on camera but wouldn't draw attention. Helen had advised me to sit in the middle section, visible but not prominent. Close enough to see Kenneth's face clearly when it happened. The community center was packed when I arrived at 6:45. Campaign volunteers handed out flyers and buttons at the entrance. Kenneth stood near the stage, shaking hands and posing for selfies, looking confident and relaxed in a navy suit with an American flag pin on his lapel. Mom sat in the front row, beaming with pride. She saw me enter and waved enthusiastically, patting the empty seat she'd saved beside her. I made my way down the aisle, hugged her, and sat down, trying to ignore the sick feeling in my stomach. Kenneth spotted me and gave a small wave, his expression pleasant and family-friendly. He had no idea that FBI agents were already positioned at every exit. That Agent Bradford was sitting 3 rows behind us in civilian clothes. That Helen Morrison was in the back row with a leather portfolio containing copies of every warrant, every charge, every piece of evidence we'd compiled. That in less than 30 minutes, his entire life would detonate in spectacular fashion. Mom squeezed my hand. "I'm so proud of him," she whispered. "He's worked so hard for this." I squeezed back, unable to find words that wouldn't break her heart prematurely. The moderator called the forum to order at 7 o'clock exactly. 5 candidates took their seats on stage, Kenneth positioned second from the left. The format was straightforward. Opening statements, then questions from the moderator, then audience questions. Kenneth's opening statement was polished and passionate. He spoke about transparency in education spending, about preparing students for a technology-driven future, about community values and fiscal responsibility. The audience applauded. Mom clapped loudest of all. And I sat there knowing every word was a lie spoken by a man who'd built his campaign on crime. The moderator moved through questions about budget allocations and curriculum development. Kenneth answered with practiced ease, citing statistics and referencing education research. He was performing brilliantly, and I could see people in the audience nodding along, convinced by his apparent expertise. At 7:14, my phone buzzed silently with a text from Agent Chin. "All teams in position. Ready on your signal." I forwarded it to Agent Bradford, who stood slowly and moved toward the side entrance where 6 additional agents waited out of sight. At 7:19, the moderator opened the floor for audience questions. A woman in the 4th row asked about technology privacy in classrooms. Kenneth leaned forward, eager to address his signature issue. "Privacy is paramount, especially for our children. We need robust systems that protect student data while enabling innovative learning tools. My background in technology consulting has taught me that security and accessibility can coexist when properly implemented." The irony of a data thief lecturing about privacy protection would have been funny if it weren't so grotesque. Agent Bradford appeared in the center aisle, moving purposefully toward the stage. 3 other agents materialized from different entrances, all converging with synchronized precision. The audience noticed the movement, heads turning, conversations pausing mid-sentence. Kenneth saw them too, his confident expression flickering with confusion. Agent Bradford reached the stage steps, his credentials held high. "Kenneth Dorsey, I'm Special Agent Thomas Bradford with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Please step down from the stage." The community center erupted in shocked murmurs. Kenneth's face went through rapid transformations. Confusion to disbelief to calculation to fear, all in the span of seconds. "There must be some mistake," he said into his microphone, his voice projecting through the speakers. "I'm in the middle of a public forum." Bradford didn't flinch. "Mr. Dorsey, you're under arrest for violations of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit corporate espionage. Step down now, or these officers will come up and retrieve you." Mom turned to me, her face stricken with incomprehension. "Rachel, what's happening? This can't be real." I took her hand as Kenneth slowly stood, his politician's mask completely shattered. 2 agents moved onto the stage, flanking him. One produced handcuffs while the other began reading Miranda rights in a clear voice that carried across the now silent auditorium. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Kenneth's eyes found mine in the audience, and in that moment, he understood. The careful pretense I'd maintained over the past week. The seemingly normal family dinner. The acceptance of his apology. It had all been theater, buying time for this exact moment. His expression twisted with rage and betrayal before the agents turned him around, securing his hands behind his back. "This is a setup," he shouted as they guided him toward the steps. "My stepdaughter orchestrated this because she never accepted her mother's happiness. It's a vendetta disguised as law enforcement." Helen Morrison stood from her position in the back row, her voice cutting through the chaos with courtroom authority. "Mr. Dorsey's statement is being recorded and will be added to evidence of consciousness of guilt. For the record, I'm Dr. Helen Morrison, former federal prosecutor. The FBI investigation began after Kenneth Dorsey was discovered stealing classified data from his stepdaughter's home computer. He has systematically stolen over $12 million in proprietary corporate information, forged his wife's signature on multiple legal documents, and participated in an organized crime network spanning 5 states. The community center exploded with noise. Cameras flashed. People shouted questions. The moderator sat frozen at her table, clearly unprepared for her school board forum to become a federal arrest. Mom's hand went limp in mine, her face drained of all color. "Rachel, tell me this isn't true. Tell me there's been a terrible mistake." Her voice was barely a whisper, but it cut deeper than any shout could have. I turned to face her fully, seeing the beginning of comprehension dawn in her eyes. "Mom, Kenneth has been going into my house while I was at work. He's been stealing files from my computer and selling corporate secrets. The FBI has evidence of everything. He's been doing this for almost 2 weeks." Mom's hand flew to her mouth. "Your house?" "But he said he needed the key in case I needed something while recovering. He said it was for me." The realization of how thoroughly she'd been manipulated struck her like a physical blow. "What else?" "There's more, isn't there?" Agent Chin approached our row with a female victim advocate in tow. "Mrs. Dorsey, I'm Special Agent Lisa Chin. I need to inform you that federal investigators will be executing a search warrant at your residence within the next 30 minutes. You're welcome to be present, but given the circumstances, it might be better if you came with us to provide a formal statement. We've also discovered evidence that your husband forged your signature on several financial documents, including a second mortgage on your home." Mom made a sound like all the air had been punched from her lungs. The victim advocate, a kind-faced woman named Sarah, gently guided her to standing. "Mrs. Dorsey, I know this is overwhelming. Let's get you somewhere private where we can talk through what happens next. You're not in any trouble. You're a victim here too. Mom looked back at the stage where Kenneth was being led away in handcuffs, his expensive suit and campaign confidence reduced to nothing. Then she looked at me with eyes full of pain and dawning understanding. You knew. You've known and you didn't tell me. The FBI asked me not to. I'm so sorry, Mom. I wanted to protect you from this moment as long as possible. She nodded slowly, tears beginning to track down her cheeks. You did protect me. You stopped him before he could do worse. I just wish it didn't hurt this much. Sarah led her toward a side room where agents waited to take her statement. I watched her walk away, her posture defeated, and felt the weight of what justice actually costs the people who love the guilty. Helen sat down beside me as the community center slowly cleared, people streaming out to spread news of the dramatic arrest. Jennifer Walsh was arrested at campaign headquarters 20 minutes ago. Agents found a server farm in the back office with stolen data from at least 30 different victims. They also arrested 4 buyers and seized equipment from multiple locations. This network is finished. She paused, studying my face. How are you holding up? I feel like I just destroyed my mother's life to save my own. Helen's expression softened. You saved her life too. Kenneth forged loan documents against her house. In another 6 months, she would have lost everything and never understood why. You stopped a predator who was using her as camouflage while he committed federal crimes. That's not destruction. That's rescue, even if it doesn't feel that way right now. The next weeks unfolded with bureaucratic inevitability. Kenneth was denied bail after prosecutors argued he was a flight risk with international connections through his buyers. Jennifer Walsh flipped immediately, providing detailed testimony about the entire operation in exchange for a reduced sentence. The 8 other victims we'd identified came forward with their own stories of family betrayal and systematic theft. Media coverage was intense and unrelenting. My face appeared on news broadcasts and in articles about the case, always described as the cybersecurity analyst who brought down an espionage ring by documenting her own victimization. Mom moved into my guest room temporarily while federal investigators processed her house as a crime scene. We spent long evenings talking through her grief and anger, untangling 2 years of manipulation from the genuine moments she thought she'd shared with Kenneth. Her therapist called it complicated grief, mourning someone who never actually existed while processing betrayal by the person who did. Slowly, painfully, she began to heal. The trial took place 4 months later in federal court. Kenneth faced 23 separate charges across multiple indictments. The evidence was overwhelming. My testimony lasted 3 hours, walking the jury through the timeline of discovery, the forensic analysis, the network logs that proved systematic theft. Agent Bradford testified about the broader conspiracy. Helen Morrison, brought in as an expert witness on white-collar crime, explained how Kenneth's operation represented a new evolution in corporate espionage. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all 23 counts. Sentencing came 2 months later. The judge, a no-nonsense woman who'd spent 20 years on the federal bench, showed no mercy. Mr. Dorsey, you violated trust at every level. You exploited your wife's love, your stepdaughter's compassion, and the public's faith in political candidates. You stole from corporations, endangered national security, and participated in organized crime while presenting yourself as a community leader. The sentence is 32 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for 15 years, full restitution to all victims, and permanent forfeiture of all assets obtained through criminal activity. Mom and I sat together on the cottage porch 6 months after the sentencing, watching autumn leaves drift across the yard. She'd reclaimed her house after the FBI investigation concluded, sold it immediately, and used the proceeds to buy a smaller place near me. The second mortgage Kenneth had fraudulently obtained was voided by the court. Her financial losses were being recovered through the restitution process, though it would take years for everything to be repaid. I keep thinking about how he asked me for that key, Mom said quietly. How he made it seem like he was being thoughtful. Taking care of me. And all along he was planning to rob my daughter. She turned to look at me. How did you know to document everything? Most people would have just confronted him and moved on. You taught me that, I said. Remember when I was 12 and that neighbor tried to claim our fence was on his property? You pulled out 20 years of survey documents, property records, and photographs. You taught me that truth requires evidence, and evidence requires documentation. You said numbers don't lie when people do. Mom's eyes filled with tears. I never imagined you'd need to use that lesson against my own husband. Neither did I. But I'm glad I knew how. Because otherwise, he'd still be in your house, still stealing, still lying. Still running for office on a platform built entirely on crime. I squeezed her hand. You're free now, Mom. Really free. Not just from Kenneth, but from wondering if you're crazy for being suspicious. From making excuses for behavior that felt wrong. From being used as a shield for someone else's corruption. She nodded slowly, a small smile breaking through. You know what's funny? Kenneth used to say family shares everything. He was right, just not the way he meant. Family shares the burden of truth. The cost of justice. The work of healing. She stood, brushing off her jeans. And now we share the knowledge that we're stronger than the people who tried to break us. My phone buzzed with a news alert. Kenneth's appeals had been denied. His sentence would stand. Jennifer Walsh had been sentenced to 18 years. 3 of the buyers were facing their own trials. The corporate espionage network had been completely dismantled. 17 victims had recovered their stolen data and received restitution. And somewhere in a federal prison, Kenneth Dorsey was learning that family doesn't share everything. Sometimes family protects itself by exposing the predators who pretend to belong. Mom looked out at the sunset painting the sky in shades of amber and gold. What do we do now? I thought about the question, about all the ways our lives had changed since that Tuesday afternoon when I came home early and found Kenneth at my desk. We keep documenting. Keep protecting each other. Keep trusting that the truth matters more than temporary peace. I smiled. And we make sure no one ever uses your keys without permission again. She laughed, the sound genuine and free. We sat together as darkness fell, 2 women who'd survived betrayal by refusing to stay silent, who'd chosen evidence over excuses, who'd learned that sometimes the greatest act of love is exposing the lies that everyone else wants to ignore. Kenneth had been wrong about family sharing everything. But he'd been right about one thing. Family does protect its own. He just never realized he was never really part of ours. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.